On to item 2 and just ask if there are any declarations of interest for this meeting, please. Okay, thank you very much. Can I move then to item 3, the 18th of November, where we were primarily doing some very important business on the accounts with a report from the chair of the audit committee. We approved our accounts and report and of course went through the budget. Are those minutes accurate, please? Thank you very much. And are there any points not covered elsewhere on the agenda, please? Okay, thank you very much. So we come to a very important piece of business, which is the National Infrastructure Commission's Rail Needs Assessment, a very important input to ministerial decision making on the integrated rail plan. And I'm going to ask Tim Foster to introduce his paper, please.
Thank you, John. The paper that was issued really gives our very rapid assessment to the rail needs assessment that was published in mid-December by the National Infrastructure Commission. As members know, the rail needs assessment is feeding into the government's integrated rail plan, which we were expecting to be finalised and published at the end of 2020, but has been delayed into early 2021. There's therefore a very limited window to influence decision making in government, and the recommendation of the paper is actually that the board makes urgent representation back to government. I won't necessarily, I won't today, for the purpose of the meeting, John, go through the detail of the assessment. I know that our assessment, the rail needs assessment, is shared by many. That, and as we have previously set out for the board, the NIC were asked an exam question, which isn't actually looking at what's needed in terms of rail for the next 25 to 30 years, but instead what is effectively asked to answer the question about what could be delivered against a fixed set of budget scenarios. So the outcome of the rail needs assessment that provides a set of scenarios, for different combinations of interventions, which none of which meet either the stated position of this board, nor the commitment from government, and nor do we think, for that matter, the intent of the Prime Minister and the Transport Secretary to deliver Northern Powers Rail and HS2 in full, that we end up with a set of options on the table, all of which, in to one degree or another, are suboptimal. And I think, as Barry has said publicly, and as the paper sets out, the reason for that is really clear. It's because in setting those budgets and then doing the assessment against them, the NIC have taken the rising costs and the overrun costs in HS2 phase 1 between London and Birmingham as a given, and therefore that has, to use Barry's phrase, left the Northern and Midlands investment acting as a shock absorber. And therefore the level of investment that the NIC was saying as recently as 2018 would be appropriate for Northern Powers Rail, the rail needs assessment actually represents a downgrading of the NIC's assessment based almost entirely on that financial assessment. The paper then goes on to set out a lot of the, both the really significant economic and transport consequences of government adopting any of those scenarios. But what it really tries to do, though, is to put a counter proposition back and recommends in section 6 a number of things that could be done, and that's based on the very detailed work that TFN has been carrying out on behalf of the board through 2020 to both to feed into the National Infrastructure Commission's assessment, but also to give advice to government. And I think those things are absolutely around the opportunities to look again at the funding assessment and to make more strategic choices on funding over the longer term, and the paper sets out a number of ways in which that could be achieved. There is, we believe, some room in the fiscal remit, and in making long-term multimodal choices, particularly between long-term road and rail budgets, for that to be achieved. But there's also a really important point about pipeline. So for a very long time, this board has called for a northern infrastructure pipeline. The NRC makes some sort of positive recommendations towards all of that, but much of it is sort of couched in terms of what's described as an adaptive pipeline, effectively making some decisions now and then going on to make further decisions later. We think that is really we think that is potentially really quite damaging in terms of economic ambition and transformation, particularly in the context of wider investment around rail. So there is a way through this. There is a way through this, which means looking again at the funding scenarios of looking in particular at opportunities to integrate the delivery of HS2 and NPR, not least to generate the efficiencies from a genuinely integrated long-term pipeline. And those opportunities, are set out in the paper, and they're relatively clear and they're available. And that would be the key route through for us to really achieve the outcome that we want, which is both NPR and HS2 to be delivered alongside each other, as well as the really key upgrades to the conventional network and freight. I've talked for quite a bit longer than I intended, John, so I will bring it to a close there and open to questions.
Okay, Tim, thanks for that. Thanks for setting it out very clearly. So what we have before us is that the 27 billion that we thought we had for NPR that wasn't enough, but was something to build on in the 2018 assessment, has shrunk on the baseline to of the order of 5 billion because of phase one HS2 cost increases. So even with a 25% increase in the NIC's budget proposal, we still only get aspects of NPR, and it's really only with a 50% uplift in the proposed budget that we get anywhere close to our transformational vision, and then not completely. So that's what we're facing. We've sought a meeting with the Secretary of State to make representations. The proposal is that Barry writes after this meeting so that we have a letter in the department that we then can talk about with the board delegation. So I'm going to throw it open now to questions, and I think it was, did I see Chris's hand up first?
It's just a brief one. Thank you very much. It's just a brief one to say thank you very much and say that I think this idea of levelling up and so on, the whole thing, is that for the last, nearly half a century, there's been an obsession with London, and there doesn't seem to be a general understanding that after we get out, if and after we get out of our current crisis, it will be the small, medium enterprises, the SMEs, principally of North and Midland, of which there are hundreds of thousands, that will pull the country out of its depth. And I don't want us to lose sight of the fact that we really need to keep on hammering home about adequate infrastructure for rail freight, which I think we've ignored for, well, most of my lifetime. I've been around too long already. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Points well made. Dan Jarvis, please.
Thanks very much, Chair, and thanks to Tim for the report. Look, I hope that the government will reject the rail needs assessment as the basis of their integrated rail plan. Investment in the North and the Midlands for generations to come should not be based on the false premises and the flawed methodology of this report. Look, I think the integrated rail plan will be the next big test of the government's commitment to levelling up. And we all know, because of the impact that COVID is having, that investment is now even more urgent as we try to support and revive our economies in the years ahead. So the government needs to look deep into its own coffers and find the investment that is required to deliver the transformation in our infrastructure in the north of England. And I'm afraid to say that in its financially driven approach, the Rail Needs Assessment report has lost sight of one of the key purposes that was set out by the Prime Minister, and that's the issue of integration. As a mayor, my priority for South Yorkshire is first and foremost to fix our decrepit local transport infrastructure and strengthen our connections that we have with the rest of the North and with the Midlands. But the reality is that the delivery of NPR and HS2 in full is absolutely integral to doing this. So the cancellation or the delay of HS2 2B East would have a serious knock-on effect which would undermine Northern Powerhouse Rail, particularly the Sheffield to Leeds leg. So any plan that the government agrees needs to start with a guarantee that those major projects can be built in full and without delay. And as I say, I'm afraid the Rail Needs Assessment report presents them as competing for investment rather than recognising them as the other side of the same coin, which are both essential to deliver the government's levelling up agenda. So if the government are serious about levelling up the north of England, they need to demonstrate that through the publication of the Integrated Rail Plan. Thank you, John.
Thank you. Now I have a number of people wanting to speak. I'm going to go to Darren Hale, who was first up with his hand, and then Heather Scott.
Thank you, John. I mean, yes, following on from what Dan has just said, I think it's, in many ways for us in Hull, obviously HS2 was a means to an end in terms of getting that vital infrastructure uplift from our city to the rest of the north. And, with these proposals, I would suggest that, even our base electrification from this region to Leeds would have to be in jeopardy. And certainly there'd be no linkage between Sheffield and Hull, or no improvements from the ridiculous 88 minutes or whatever it is at the moment. And how you can have joined up north and two of the biggest cities in the north, you're an hour and a half apart, is just ludicrous. So I do think, following what Dan said, we do need to, to push back on this, and hopefully the politicians will see the disconnect between what they've said in terms of levelling up, and then, as you said, effectively robbing the money off this scheme to shore up the Midlands and the South, which is effectively what it is. It's a complete reverse of levelling up, isn't it? It's a further example of what has happened historically. And I think that, we will be judged as Transport for the North, but as regional leaders and politicians, we will be judged by what happens here as to whether we missed the opportunity, because we were clear that this was a chance for, transformational, wasn't it? Transport for the North to levelling up a transformational connection between the great cities and the great regions of the North. And this is almost like a beaching moment if we're not careful. And if we're found wanting here, I'm sure the people that follow us wouldn't look kindly on our contribution. So I think we have no choice but to push back on it. Thank you.
And thank you, Darren, for pointing out the implications for Hull, which are true of quite a few other regional centres. That, one might have thought we might face some challenges about the really big capital investment proposals we're making, like Leeds to Manchester, which are really big calls. But actually, we don't even in this proposal get the continuous improvement upgrades that can be done from Leeds to Hull and Sheffield to Hull at very significant benefit at rather modest cost. The network is not there in anything other than the plus 50% option, for the reason that we're now clear on. Heather next, and then I'll go to Andy.
Thank you, John. And yes, I totally reject this proposal. And I would remind people that the North East is part of the North. And in this plan, we seem to have been excluded totally. The commitment to the East Coast Main Line is not included in it. And obviously the upgrade north of York is not there either. And I think it's important that we have the same opportunity for levelling up. Particularly within the Tees Valley area, we've got a commitment for the upgrade of Darlington Banktop Station, and it just doesn't make sense. So I think that we obviously have to make application to the Minister, and just certainly on behalf of Tees Valley, I will put very strongly our objections to this. And just to remind you all, North East is part of the North, and we must not be excluded. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Heather. Andy, and then I'll go to Steve Rotherham.
Thank you, Chair. Morning, everybody. Can I just strongly endorse what Heather just said and everyone else who's spoken before. This is all very worrying, I have to say, John, and I think it also needs to be seen in the context of the budget of this organisation. This is the critical moment in all of the debates we've had about a rail infrastructure for the north of England, east, west, north, south, that sets us up for the 21st century, that levels us up. and we are hitting the moment now where these decisions are being taken, and yet, as Tim outlined very clearly at the start, the old framing of London and the South East getting first dibs and then everything else sort of having to sort of scrimp and save is the same old, isn't it? So this is not changing the way this country works or the way that it is run. And as I have always said, I believe in this organisation because it's trying to change that. It's trying to speak with one clear voice. In our meeting when we discussed Northern Powerhouse Rail, John, before Christmas, we began to make compromises on our ambitions. We kept high ambitions, but we were beginning to use this body as a forum to work with each other, to recognise where things were important one to another, and that's what we should be doing. But at the same time, we should still be working together as one North. If we get picked off, then I think this is a sign that the wrong decisions will be made. And so I want to fully support what Tim said in his analysis and everyone who's spoken. My question comes to the recommendation of the paper, because I'm not entirely sure what immediate representations means and whether it would have the desired effect. We are a statutory body. I believe we should be providing statutory advice to the government, and we should be today agreeing a process by which we do that, and then that advice should be published, because history wouldn't judge any of us on this board kindly if at this moment in time we just went quiet and started to accept our fate. I think we've said all along, John, this board stands for ambition for the North, and that is what we need to follow through on now. And as a statutory body, we should be making our views very plain so the public fully understand everything that's involved here. So I would say that we take that phrase, immediate representations, and extend it and involve this board in making sure we get those representations right, strong, clear, but also published as statutory advice to the government. Thank you, John.
Thank you for that, Andy. Let me just hold your thought on the actions we take as a result of this meeting and make sure we come back to that when we sum up what the consensus of the board is. Let me say what we've already done. We've already met with the Permanent Secretary to express the view that we felt the board would not support the assessment, and to make sure that we had enough time to get a view in. The concern was this board meeting going to be too late? We were given assurance that we would have the opportunity to make representations. We have already made clear that a letter will result from this meeting, and that a delegation of this board wishes to meet with the Secretary of State urgently, so that we do not find ourselves with an excellent view that's slightly too late. But let me come back to the precise details of how and what we do at the end of the discussion. So I have Steve Rotherham next, and then Louise.
Thanks, Chair. And I agree with the actions that Andy has proposed, and we should all, I suppose, on top of that, individually make representations to government, and I know we'll come on to that later and we'll discuss that. So first of all, then, to agree with lots of the points, certainly from Dan and Darren and others that they made, but just a couple of wider points, Chair, if I can, and then a more parochial one, because it appears that the schemes in the report are pitted against each other, which goes against the nature of what we're trying to achieve. It should be an integrated assessment, and there seems to be little consideration of the potential efficiencies if it was integrated, and we've just heard it highlighted in the case of HS2 and NPR delivery, so why not in this case? None of the schemes in the package of schemes rather set out in that rail needs assessment align actually with the TfN board preferred network itself, or certainly with prior advice that we've provided to government. And the baseline only provides a series of upgrades, and they're not aligned themselves to the NPR development. So I think it's a whole series of fragmentations. Now, baseline plus 50, if I can be just slightly parochial, is the only option that would result in a whole new line between Liverpool and Leeds. And by that I mean, if you remember, the board endorsed options such as 5.2 in our area, which would be between Liverpool and Manchester, but that does provide us with the whole new line, and that's the only way in which we can actually future-proof what it is that we're going to agree to, in the present day, whenever that comes about. And I'll wait until the discussion around the actions, John, if that's okay.
Of course, thank you, Steve. I absolutely agree with you. We haven't got a network here on anything other than the plus 50% proposal. Can I just signal that I'd quite like an input? I've got a couple more members wishing to speak. I'd quite like an input from LEP colleagues, just to make sure we take on the entrepreneurial agenda. I'm going to go to Louise first and then Hans Mundry. Louise.
Yeah, just to say, Judith's got a hand up as well. John, if you haven't seen
Louise. Thank you.
Yeah, I don't want to repeat what everyone said, just that I totally agree with what has been said so far. And what we've learned is that whatever we do in any area in the north has an impact on the rest of the north and the rest of the country, the union with Wales, the union with Scotland. And it's almost like the government doesn't quite get that, and we need to be able to explain really clearly. It's like a big jigsaw puzzle, and we've managed to put all those pieces together to make sure it's one picture. And I think if any of those pieces are taken out, it will just have a detrimental impact to all of us. So I'd just like to concur with and support everything that everyone said so far. Thanks.
Thank you, Louise. And I've got Judith on the list. So Hans Mundry.
Yes, I'm going to be very short, John. I think fully agree what Steve had to say. Is from Warrington's point of view, I think the 5-2 is a compromise, but it's the only one we can accept. We can't go any further than that. I think the North took a battering already from this process, and we can't go any. That's going to be our line. We can't go any further than that compromise of 5-2, and its fulltality as well. Not part of that, but the fulltality of it with a full line and the station in Liverpool. From that side of it, the question, I think, if you're going to send a letter, what I'd like to be put in that letter is you can look at the terminology of it, is in the government strategy of the levelling up, where does taking money from the north to pay for schemes in the south of Warrington comes into their strategy? It doesn't make any sense. You say one thing and then do another. So are we going to do levelling up properly? Are we going to look at the needs of the north properly, or are we going to keep moving money from the north to fund the south?
Thank you very much, Hans. Very clearly put. Mark Roberts.
Thank you very much, John. I did want to just add my perspective as an entrepreneur and business owner, and agree very much with the other speakers. I think, the economic benefits of the business cases for all of this infrastructure investment is going to make it easier for the many and wonderful small businesses across our region to better connect with each other, and also to adjacent regions like the Midlands, like Wales, like Scotland. Before COVID, as a regular commuter from Leeds to London, I find transit to London very accessible. But I find it incomprehensible how difficult it is to connect to other cities such as Manchester and such as other areas across the north. And I really do think that businesses will be more productive and be able to provide more economic benefits if we can better join it up. So I fully support this paper passionately, and I fully support advocating the TfN response to DFT.
Thank you very much, Mark. And Judith.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Chair. And I think the quality of the contributions this morning have been absolutely spot on, and really want to endorse so many of the comments that have been made. Also, can I say thank you to officers for putting this response together. And particularly Section 5, and I think the detail that has gone into this, and really supporting the case that Transport for the North has been making around the need for northern investment, the integrated model, is something we can all support. Could I just ask, when we do submit to the department, that we include links to all of the economic case work that we've done, particularly around the linkages down to the East Midlands, But this is, I think it's well understood that there's a real sense that the whole of the east of the north has been let down by the response, going right from the west to East Midlands into South Yorkshire, up through Yorkshire, out to Holland, up to the northeast. If we could just repeat that economic evidence wherever we can, I think that would help us strengthen our case in terms of the transformational benefit. And what we're talking about is business confidence, and what we know the benefit is when announcements are made of intention to invest. The difference in response from businesses is unbelievable. We already started to see it in Leeds when there was earlier commitments for HS2 coming in, linking with Northern Powerhouse Rail, for example. What I think has really disappointed me most about the NIC report is going back to that awful language almost of either this or that, but also something that we've really tried to get away from, that this our whole agenda isn't about links to London. It's about the whole connectivity around the north, but I would include going down into the Midlands around that. So very much support the response and the comments that have been made about needing to keep that integrated message, and look forward very much to the actions that you're going to propose and put forward. Thank you.
Thank you. And I see on the chat bar, Paul Haslam's making the very telling point that is very much TFN's policy that public rail systems deliver on decarbonisation, both for passengers, but also by getting rail freight off the road and onto rail. And that's something that seems to have been missed in not investing. So I've got two more people I know want to comment, both from our LEP members. I'll go first to Mark Ralston and then go to Peter Kennan. Mark Ralston, please.
Thank you, Chair. I won't repeat previous comments, but which I fully agree with generally. But I would just like to emphasise those comments that Judith made around the economic case in all of this. If there is one argument that I think is going to be persuasive with government, it is this economic argument, and therefore our response needs to be extremely robust back to government on this. Frankly, everybody has said about the NIC report being disappointing. Well, actually, I think it's more than disappointing. I was actually angry when I read it, because taking Andy's comments earlier, this is just yet another example of same old out of Westminster, and we have got to be incredibly robust in our defence of the economic benefits from an integrated transport system in the north. And on that basis, rant over. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think finally in this round of comments, Peter Kennan.
Thank you, John. I'm also clear that Tim Foster's paper has the right approach. We need to start from levelling up and build back better, and we need to sideline the NIC report as answering an inappropriate exam question. And we do need to put forward our plans, and I totally agree with the approach suggested. I do think that because this is an integrated rail plan for the North and Midlands, that we should, to the largest extent possible, work with colleagues in the Midlands, and particularly follow on the really good work that's been done by HS2 East as an organisation, working closely with colleagues in the East Midlands. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Peter. It appears to me, Tim, we very much have consensus on your paper. So if you'll just bear with me, I think actually the most appropriate use of time would be to go straight to Barry. And Barry, could you address what you propose, building on Tim's analysis and recommendations for TFN action?
Thank you, John. The intention that Tim had was to turn the latter part of this paper into statutory advice to government. So actually that would be very much intended to get that done as quickly as possible so that we can feed in and make sure it hits in the timing for the integrated rail plan. Tim, do you just want to comment on that? 'Cause I know you've given that some thought.
Well, just say very briefly, I think sections 4, 5 and 6 of the paper, I think capture the points that members have made. We can translate that into a draft letter and turn that around very quickly. I think that it obviously needs to land really quickly. We'll take the board's view on whether you'd like to see that in draft in advance, but given the importance, that will be the focus, I think, of the draft.
And then Barry, anything else you want to say on actions?
I think, sorry, the other thing John Rack could be doing is trying to get a meeting with a delegation of the board and the Secretary of State, and I think we are probably in broad agreement with the Transport Secretary in much of what we're saying. I think this, from what ministers have been saying and what the Transport Secretary has been saying in public, HS2 and full and NPR are priorities for the government. So I think it is actually get that meeting with them. Now, actually, we just found out yesterday the meeting on the week commencing the 18th. We were having to look into the following week now just to try to get time in his calendar, but we are pushing for that urgent meeting with them as well.
Okay, Andy, let me come back to you. You'd asked about actions. That's the proposal.
Thank you, Chair. Apologies for coming back, but just wanted to just clarify. A letter, it doesn't quite do it for me. As I understand it, as an organisation, as a statutory body, we have the ability to issue statutory advice. And Mark Rawston said it. It needs a very robust response, and I think we have to differentiate some of the things that we've lobbied on in the past with this, because this goes to the heart of what we invest so much in this organisation for, doesn't it? This couldn't be more critical than this. And it hasn't been mentioned, John, but I feel I must mention it very briefly. And it picks up Heather's earlier points. Sir Peter Hendy is simultaneously conducting a review of connectivity of the Union of the UK. And obviously, if the North East was to be cut out in the way he suggested, that massively restricts Peter's hand, I would say. But also on our side, there's something called the Goulburn Link, which is a victim of this, which would be the sort of pathway for HS2 up to Scotland eventually. And it would actually improve connectivity for Scotland to London if the Goulburn Link was in. So I think this is a moment for transport for the North, particularly when we look at this context of a reduction in the budget. Our voice cannot be reduced. It needs to be amplified at this moment in time. And therefore, I would ask you, Chair, to put it to this board that we consider the strongest kind of tool we have in the box here, which is statutory advice, to make it plain that we don't agree with this. And obviously, although the government is not formally required to accept it, it would be formally required to acknowledge what Transport for the North as a collective body was saying. Thank you.
So I just want to make sure we're perhaps using different words for the same thing. Barry, I thought your intention was that the letter would be statutory advice.
Absolutely, yes. I'm very happy to confirm that. Yes, we intended to give it as statutory advice. I'm sorry if I didn't make that clear enough, but absolutely 100%.
Tim is nodding as well. So I think this is a very strong letter. I think the paper has received very strong support and is amplified by the comments at the meeting. I've been checking the chat bar. There are supportive comments from the North East, from Cumbria. Nobody, I think, has a counter view. I think the only issue, we know that the integrated rail plan, Andy, was meant to be agreed by December. It hasn't been agreed yet. There will be discussions at the heart of government. And the timetable there is one that we are not entirely cited on. It isn't our business. Do you as a board wish to see Barry's letter in draft? I'm quite happy with that. It's just the balance between getting that letter into government in order to get the meeting with the Secretary of State as against you seeing it. I think, Tim, you feel you could turn around that letter in the next 48 hours. Is that a reasonable deadline?
If not sooner, John, yes.
If not sooner. I'm quite happy for the board to see it, but I'm just suggesting to you we will need to move at speed. I think a hand up from Keith Little and then Louise Gittings. Keith?
Yeah. Sorry, John. I was just going to suggest that perhaps we should share that letter once it has been agreed
by the members of this board with the leaders of all our authorities, and I know not all of our leaders are there. My leader doesn't sit here, but we will share this information. And how about sharing it with all the members of Parliament for the North that we represent?
Very good idea, Keith. Thank you very much. I'm sure we can do that. Louise.
Yeah, I was just really going to add on to that. Really, it should be in the public domain as well, isn't it? Shouldn't it? We need, the public to be supporting us on this, and they can lobby their MPs. And I can see it's really important that we all take this forward together. And just on another note, we do actually have a dame in our midst now, Judith Blake. So she's going to be going to the House of Lords soon. So we've got a really strong person who can be lobbying us there. And I'd like to say congratulations to Judith for that position as well.
Even a baroness, I think.
Sorry, is it a baroness? I'm sorry.
You're right, Louise, you're absolutely right. A Baroness Blake of Leeds or some such title, if the College of Arms approves. So, yes, let me join you in that. Congratulations, Judith.
Thank you, John. And I will keep fighting the fighters, if that's the appropriate terminology to use. But I very much will hope I can use whatever facilities that we have down there to make sure that we keep the voice of the North right at the heart of Westminster. So looking forward to continuing the work, but I'll obviously let you know exactly what the plan is in terms of my own position and board membership. But thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Okay, colleagues, I think Barry, do you think we have an opportunity to nip Tim's letter round the board, but with a very tight deadline for comment?
Yeah, yes, I do, John, and also I think taking Louise and Andy's point about it being published as well and actually circulating it broadly, I think that is a reasonable course of action too. This is a response to a public document, so the real needs assessment was a public document, so responding to that in a public fashion I think is appropriate as well.
Yeah, and obviously this is a public session of this meeting, so I'm sure there will be news coverage of the strength of view of this board. So the actions then are that Tim will rapidly draft a letter reflecting his recommendations in the paper as outlined in section 6 and amplified with the comments at this meeting, and we will circulate that with a rapid turnaround, please, and then publish it as statutory advice. Okay, and we'll come back to you when we have more news on a meeting with the Secretary of State. Are colleagues happy that we move on? Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Move on to item 5 then, which is the TransPennine tunnel and the M6A1 corridors statutory advice. So here's another example of us doing what we're meant to do. Now, I'm going to try to handle this item somewhat more succinctly, simply because of how many urgent items there are on today's agenda, particularly in item 6. But I don't want to in any way seek to restrict comment. My reason for suggesting that is, of course, we have twice in the last few months debated this issue, and at the Partnership Board in November we considered precisely this item, and the Partnership Board provided advice. So today what the Board is being asked to consider are recommendations for next steps, looking at viable options for improving connectivity in the 2 corridors I outlined. Building on the last 2 discussions, the recommendations recognise that the ambition for fully dualled new roads is not viable. That's the proposal. It didn't pass the test of cost and benefit and environmental impact. But there is still a need to improve road connections in these 2 very important corridors. And that is what is proposed to you today. So in a sense, we are lowering our ambition on road new build in order to come up with something which is more proportionate and more environmentally sensitive. And I think I should record at this moment that we have received a letter on this matter from the CPRE, which Pete Molyneux, our roads director, will comment on our response to, which I think will be positive, in his wrap-up on this. But now I'm just going to throw it open for comments and particularly ask people to focus on the recommendation in 5.1 that the board is asked to agree TFN writing to the Secretary of State, setting out our recommended steps as proposed in section 4. And then I will give Pete Molyneux the right of reply. Dan Jarvis.
Thank you very much, Chair. I completely agree with the way that you framed this item. We support the recommendations. I'm also mindful of time, but you'll forgive me if I just briefly want to restate the importance of looking at how we can improve connectivity between South Yorkshire and Greater Manchester. I think that is essential for the wider northern economy. I think that Sheffield to Manchester is the poorest connected of the city pairings across the north of England, and actually improved connectivity would not only kind of benefit that wider northern economy, it would help grow the use of the northern ports and of course increase the resilience on the M62. I did just want to briefly take the opportunity to reinforce the point about the rail connectivity and the long-standing concerns that we've had, in fact the concerns on both sides of the Pennines about the need to upgrade and improve the Hope Valley line. Some progress is being made with that, but we still need to see much more progress in the near future. Of course, everybody's incredibly mindful of the environmental impacts of any of these projects, and that's why an environmentally sustainable solution which seeks to reduce pressures on air quality, of course, is an absolutely vital component on that. So I just really wanted to take the opportunity to say that we support the recommendations of the report. We encourage DfT to continue to work with us and with colleagues at Transport for the North to find a workable solution to the challenges that we face. And I think that this work should inform rather than detract from measures to improve the immediate and more short-term interventions that are required to improve our connectivity over the Pennines between Greater Manchester and South Yorkshire. Thank you very much, John.
Thank you, Dan. And now Michael Green, please, and then I'll come to Peter Kennan.
Thank you, Chairman. I speak in support of the recommendation that's before us. Clearly, there is a need for improvements. But there need to be more local improvements sponsored by Transport for the North, working together with the relevant transport authorities and highways authorities along the routes to secure the improvements which will make a massive difference, but improvements that will be deliverable both in financial terms and will not have significant impacts upon the environment. So I think there is a way forward on this where we can secure improvements for users moving forwards, but in a much more financially sensible and environmentally sensible approach. So happy to support the recommendation.
Thank you, Michael. Peter Kennan, and then I'll come to Andy Agorn.
Thank you, Chair. I also support the paper in relation to TransPennine Tunnel, and I share Mayor Jarvis's wish for DfT to continue to work with us and colleagues at TFN to find solutions. As you said in relation to Rail North, the Rail Needs Assessment, Chair, business expects continuous improvement and productivity gains. And you only need to look out of the window today to see why this is a challenge. No doubt the routes we're talking about are closed as we speak. What we're looking for is improved journey times and consistent journey times. Important to note that the Highways England road is the A628, which is the subject of this paper. But that isn't the only route to which we should be concerned. We should be concerned with the A57 Snake Pass, which is the main route from Sheffield Centre to Manchester. And we should be concerned with the southern route, which is the A623, which goes over Chapel in the Frith. Both of those roads are the responsibility of Derbyshire County Council and not Highways England. So I would ask colleagues at TFN if we could actually, as part of this wish to have continuous improvement, engage more closely on those other roads to see whether there are things that could be advanced to make some improvement. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Peter. I'll now come to Councillor Agorn and then finally to Councillor Don McKenzie.
Thank you. I just want to endorse the comments that other speakers have made, particularly Mayor Jarvis. about the equivalent investment which is needed in rail for this connectivity, especially if looking at the freight. And I think I have concerns about any sort of significant in investment which has unintended consequences in terms of traffic generation. So I think that is very important to focus on. And like with reference to the previous item we've been discussing, I think we need to include in our comments on this the importance of rail freight as providing investment in rail freight for the east-west movement across the Pennines is critical if we're going to be able to shift away from having, the dependence on further north on the M62 for freight at the moment, which has the same sort of problems as this is looking at in terms of resilience and reliability in the winter weather. Okay, but thank you for those points.
Thank you very much. And as several people have said, think about it today particularly. Don Mackenzie.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, North Yorkshire County Council is happy to support the paper. I thought it would be useful for me to update colleagues that North Yorkshire County Council did receive planning approval yesterday for a diversion of the A59, which is the principal TransPennine route between the A66 in the north and the M62 in the south, to divert the A59 at Kecksgill. Incidentally, the previous speaker is quite right. The road is currently closed because of heavy snow. But nevertheless, the improvement is in order to give greater resilience and reliability to this A59, which has suffered regular landslips over the years. And just to bring members up to date, the A59 runs from Merseyside through Lancashire, through North Yorkshire, and ends at the city of York. So it is a very important TransPennine route. I do understand that the conclusions that a dual carriageway is certainly not justifiable, but smaller improvement measures, such as we are carrying out at Kecksgill, and we have a business case in with the DfT for £55 million at the moment to divert the route, smaller interventions are probably the way to go to create a better TransPennine route by road between the M62 and the A66. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Don. So, Pete, I think you've got support for your recommendations. I will just make sure that's absolutely clear after you've spoken, but I think take that as given. And if you want to talk to any members, could you do it offline, because we're now running a bit behind schedule. But is there anything you wanted to say in summary, and you just want to mention the CPRE letter?
Yeah, thank you everybody for your support. We will be addressing the valid points that CPRE have made, and we can include that in the scope of the next piece of work, but also to let members know that we'll be also addressing that as part of our investment programme benefits analysis work that we'll be doing next year, and also you'll see it when the decarbonisation strategy comes forward. So thank you once again for that support.
Okay, so I'm putting recommendation 5.1 in Pete's paper to the board, which is that we write to the Secretary of State calling for more local interventions with very much a focus on rail and the environment, and the steps that are proposed by Pete in section 4. Do I have the support of the board for that? Thank you very much. I'm seeing hands up, thumbs up. Thank you, Heather. Thank you, others. Andy, right, we'll move on now to item 6. So item 6 is business which the chair is satisfied is urgent. Apologies, the reason for the late publication of the papers for this item is the additional preparation time required due to the late receipt of the details of the funding settlement, which have affected both items quite significantly. So we're going to move first, if you'll allow me, to item 6A, which is the funding and business plan, and I'll hand over to Ian Craven.
Thanks, John. Can I just add my apologies for the late circulation of the paper, which, as John says, was due to the timing and the content of the funding letter that we received first week in January. Can I just also say I'm getting some poor connection messages coming up on my screen. We've got 2 homeschooling online lessons, sets of online lessons going on at the moment here, and I can't reduce the capacity down any further that's been taken for the internet. So apologies in advance if that causes any problems.
Said Director Barry, Ian, I'm very pleased to hear that commitment to remote.
I'm not sure they're that keen, but anyway. So hopefully members have had an opportunity to read the report in any case, and I know many of you took the opportunity to join the member briefings that were held on the 8th and the 11th of Jan. The report sets out some of the key impacts that these funding cuts could have on TFN, obviously subject to decisions that are going to need to be made over the next few weeks. These include cuts to the funding for the delivery of TFN's statutory functions, but also the cancellation of the IST programme. And the report notes, for example, that the cuts to the IST will forestall the proposed rollout of pay-as-you-go on buses, trams and trains in the north in the near future. And that would obviously have an impact on the recovery of public transport usage after the pandemic. It also potentially has a consequential impact on public transport usage into the future, which would then impact on other agendas such as decarbonisation. Paragraph 210 sets out the disappointment that was expressed by members in response to the funding allocation in those member briefings and the concerns that they've expressed regarding the implications that these reductions will have. That's both on the delivery of the levelling up agenda, which has already been mentioned in this meeting, and also on the longer term commitment to the work that TFN does on behalf of the North. The report, as you'll see, also sets out the timing challenge that we face in formulating a business plan and a budget by March, and in reality that's probably the papers need to be finalised by the middle of March, so that's essentially a couple of months from now. And we've got a lot of potentially difficult work to do between now and then. But that obviously was caused by a combination of the late notification and the substance of the funding settlement, as has been mentioned. It's therefore important that officers are able to take away direction from the board from this meeting to provide a framework for the work that we need to carry out and undertake over the next few weeks. Members' attentions therefore drawn to paragraphs 3.6 to 3.10, which seek reaffirmation of the objectives of TFN, and hopefully those will be recognisable to members. Those are objectives which have been discussed extensively previously, and also paragraphs 3.11 to 3.19, which set out at a high level the key activities that have emerged and are proposed through the business planning that we've undertaken so far. At the same time, officers are continuing to engage with departmental officials, engaged productively with departmental officials to optimise the funding we've got available. The CSR submission in August did draw attention to the fact that TFN's core grant was being used to support programmes, both directly and indirectly. Given the significant cuts to the core funding, this is no longer sustainable, and discussions are underway with officials that could have the effect of freeing up up to around 2 million of core funding that could then be utilised for the work that's more closely aligned to the statutory functions for which that money is actually granted to us. This has been agreed in principle with officials, and we're currently in the process of pulling together more detail that we can provide to them. I think I need to note, though, that whilst getting to that position would be extremely positive, it clearly would leave TFN with some very difficult choices still to make. I wouldn't want anybody to come away, and hopefully the report fully expresses the extent of the challenges that TFN faces under any circumstances in dealing with this funding letter that it's received. Given the challenges, the timing challenge that I've already mentioned, you'll note that included in the report is a proposal that we form a small member working group to allow officers to take soundings on the development of the business plan between boards. We've essentially got one board between now and having to approve the final budget in March. And finally, I think I'd just like to draw people's attention to the recommendation regarding a letter to be sent to the Secretary of State in advance of the meeting that I think it's already been mentioned is being sought. The key points for inclusion in that letter are reflective of previous comments in the member briefings, but are set out for consideration by members at paragraph 322. But John, I would be obviously happy to, very interesting to hear member considerations, but also very happy to take questions.
Thank you, Ian. That's very, very clear. Now, as ever, we're under quite a lot of time pressure, but it's clearly a very important item. So I think we have a clear proposal from the Finance Director to both challenge the funding settlement, but also plan appropriately, given we have staff and programmes that depend on this going forward from this meeting. So if I could just ask members to be quite focused in their comments so that we can get through the agenda. Who would like to contribute? Dan Jarvis, please.
Thanks very much, Chair. I'm grateful to Ian for his report and I support the recommendations of it. I do just want, though, to raise my concerns about the impact that these cuts will have. It seems to me that they counter the government's commitment to the North, to levelling up, and they will inevitably undermine the important work of transport for the North, not least in the absolutely vital context of economic recovery as we come out of a global pandemic. The cancellation of IST will have a direct impact on our proposed activities in South Yorkshire at precisely the time we need to be investing in our transport systems. So I hope that government will look at this and think again, and certainly I will be making representations to them to encourage them to do so. Thank you, John.
Thank you very much, Dan. Steve Rotherham, and then I'll go to Louise Gittings. Steve, you may be on mute, sir.
Yes, I was, because I pressed my hand down instead of mute. Schoolboy error. Just to reiterate something that Dan said on IST. Just, 3 or 4 years ago, this was the government's part solution to the ills of public transport in the North. This was the great idea that they had, where we could bring it all together and you could have that flow across the Northern Corridor, the same as you can down south, and it's been abandoned. We've gone from £150 million to £0, so it literally is abandoned. But of course, what's happened in the interim is it's not just Transport for the North that have been investing into integrated smart ticketing. In our area, we've spent millions of pounds because we thought that we would then be able to recoup some of this from TfN, and we're told that your coffers are bare. So I'm surmising that we've invested this money with, in regard to the goodwill that we were showing to be in the vanguard of trying to do something, and that money's not down the chute, but certainly it's not going to come from any pot of money that TfN had, and that's the knock-on consequence of these, and that we're going to have to now find savings somewhere else ourselves because we thought we were going to get funding from TfN. It's really not good enough, and we need to explain that whilst it is a difficult decision, I'm sure, for TfN to stomach, some of the constituent parts of TfN are going to face significant difficulty because of the government decision.
Thank you, Steve. Point very well made. Louise, and then I'll come to Andy.
Yeah, just very quickly, I don't want to repeat what's being said, so I support the recommendation. I was really shocked when I saw this, but not surprised. Local government have been used to this, but it seems they've sort of really cut it very, very severely. I've got a Growth Track 360 meeting next week, and I'm happy to go to them to ask them to lobby on your behalf as well, because this will have impacts on some of their ambitions.
Thank you, Louise. I'm sure that would be appreciated and helpful. Andy.
Thank you, Chair. Agree with what Louise, Stephen, Dan have just said, so I won't go over all of those points, John. But this does very much link to our earlier conversation about this being a critical moment for the north of England and all of the work that we've been doing over recent years. If anything, this is the time to be strengthening the role of this board and this organisation to get the right solution for the north. We are prepared to take difficult decisions, and I think we've begun to show we can do that. But I think what we shouldn't accept is having our capacity effectively cut in half. And I think it's paragraph 2.8 Ian's paper says that the work of TfN will be affected across the board, and as well as I think around a 40% cut to core funding next year, there's an in-year funding cut this year. You know, this is it feels to me more than just asking for efficiencies to be made, which of course we would do, wouldn't we? We would accept, you know, 10, 20, whatever percent efficiencies, 40% reduction, with the other cuts as well to the integrated ticketing budgets, the freeze on NPR funding. All of this, I think, does bring into question the role of TfN. Is there a wish to weaken TfN at this moment in time so that we can't provide considered advice on all of these major decisions that are about to be taken for the north of England? Some people will make that conclusion, given you look at what the rail needs assessment has come up with, and then you look at this cut, and you look at all of that together, and it looks like levelling down. It looks like the government is preparing to say from on high what the north will be getting, rather than allowing us to articulate what we think is right for the north. So this is a critical moment. I'm happy to support Ian's recommendations in the paper, but I think in the statutory advice we give back to the government on the rail needs assessment, John, I think reference should be made to this, because it is going directly against our ability to have the capacity we need now to get the right Northern Powerhouse Rail project, particularly for the north of England. So I think we need to join all the dots here and see what's going on, and it doesn't look good. And this looks like a top-down approach and back to, if you like, being levelled down. And we should make our views very clearly known back to the government about that.
Thank you very much, Andy. I'm sure you speak for the board on this matter. Are there any more hands up? I'm not seeing any more at this point. I think we are.
John, it's Keith. Just as my role as Vice Chair of the Finance and Governance Committee, can Ian just highlight as to whether he's been in touch with any of the other statutory transport boards, and have they suffered a similar cut to the same magnitude that we are?
Ian?
Keith, I know others within TfN have. I'm not aware at this point, unless somebody is going to update from the situation that, as I understood it at the end of last week, I'm not aware that any of the others have had their funding provided to them yet, Keith.
Thank you very much indeed. I think that sends us a clear message.
Thank you. Ben Smith from the department.
Thanks, John. I just wanted to make a couple of sort of points from the department on this one. Obviously, firstly, to say recognise that members will find the settlement outcome disappointing, and particularly the lack of any further funding for the integrated and smart ticketing programme. On that specifically, I just wanted to say that there is still work going on in DfT on smart ticketing across the country, and in the conversation that Bernadette Kelly, the Permanent Secretary, had with Barry earlier this week, we agreed that we would continue to sort of work with TfN to see where we can join up on that work and sort of move forward together on some of that where possible. So just wanted to make that point. And then just on the wider core funding point, I mean, it is set out in the letter that was sent, but I mean, just to sort of reiterate, ministers are really keen that TfN focuses on delivering its core objectives, developing transport strategy for the north, providing advice to DfT, and prioritising investment, which is obviously, most of what the board has been discussing this morning. We certainly, ministers want TfN to continue with all of those important roles. And as Ian was mentioning when he spoke a few minutes ago, there are some decisions, I think, to be taken about ensuring that where costs fall to particular projects, particularly Northern Powerhouse Rail and rail franchising, that we're sort of clear that TFN is charging those costs back to those projects specifically, and hopefully that will go some way to relieving some of the pressure on the core budget. And we're very happy to work with Ian and the team to make sure that happens. That's all I wanted to say. Thanks, John.
And Ben, could you just particularly take away from this meeting, obviously the strength of view, which we will follow up directly with a letter to the Secretary of State and a request to discuss this with the Secretary of State in the meeting we're seeking with him. But can I ask you, because you mentioned IST and what might be done to address this, could I ask you particularly to pick up on Mayor Jarvis's and Mayor Rotherham's point, because the comprehensive spending review proposal that we made on IST had a lot to do with leveraging funding to be spent at city region level. And I think what Dan and Steve said is the damage to their own programmes consequential upon this decision. So if you're looking at what you're doing on IST, what is very important is what's happening at a more city region level in the north. Andy Burnham, and then I will put the board motion for approval.
Thank you, Chair. Apologies for coming back again. Okay. I did just want to make a final point on this, if I may, because I think this is where Northern Transport Acceleration Council kind of comes into conflict, if you like, or creates confusion with regard to its role and then the role of transport for the North. For those members of this board who've attended so far, I hope I could speak for them in saying it isn't the same thing as this body. It is a very different forum, much more informal and much more about people able to bring a random list of things to the Secretary of State's attention. This is a strategic body which is trying to create the right integrated transport network for the North and make the hard choices and trade-offs across the North, speaking with one voice. I think it's very important, Chair, that we don't allow any confusion to creep in now that TFN is not needed because there is this other body called the Northern Transport Acceleration Council. I think we've been over this course before, but my worry is with recent developments, particularly around the budget, it would appear to me, and it will appear to people watching this meeting from the outside, that TFN is being put on a path towards, if you like, being disbanded or towards disintegration. And I just want to make it absolutely plain today that I will defend Transport for the North strongly, resolutely, as the only entity that is about northern devolution and voices here saying what's right for us in terms of what we want for the future. And I would just say this is a moment where we need to be clear about that. Otherwise, that the whole question of levelling up is going to start to run into difficulties, because it would appear that levelling up is being defined top down by the Department for Transport and the wider government, i.e. we will decide what is good enough for the North. And I am not prepared to sign up to that. I just want to make it clear today that Transport for the North is a body that I will, and Greater Manchester will continue to invest in and defend. And I just think if people add up a number of developments that are ongoing here, people might start to sort of predict the demise of TFN. But I want to make it plain that I absolutely do not accept that. It played a very important role during the rail and timetable chaos in 2018. It has advanced our agenda in so many ways. And we're hitting a moment here where that needs to be said, and said quite clearly and confidently from this board. And I apologise for coming back in, John. But I just think people will begin to confuse Northern Transport Acceleration Council and this body. They are different, and we need to make that point and defend the role of TFM. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy, and absolutely no apology needed. I think you're speaking for the board. I've got a number of heads nodding and support on the chat bar for what you're saying. And as somebody who's involved in both of those organisations, wearing different hats, I agree with you. They are different organisations with different but complementary roles. They're not seeking to do the same thing, and therefore it's not a choice between one or the other. And in that regard, I think you've just summed up very eloquently the strength of view of the board. And I think, Ian, it very much ratifies what you had put forward in your proposed recommendations in paragraph 4, which you outlined at the beginning of this session, and I won't go through separately again. What I will ask now is for the board to support Ian's recommendations in paragraph 4 of the board paper. Can I have support for that? And then I'll give Ian the final word.
Sorry, there is
support. Ian, strong support. Any final word?
Yeah, it was just, John, there is a recommendation at 4.5, which is that the board considers establishing a member working group. Now, I think that would be helpful, but I appreciate that members have got other obligations. So it was just specifically, obviously, if we are going to do that, that needs to be by nomination from this board, and that would need to be done now, I think.
So I'd included that in my paragraph 4, wrapping it all together. I'm accepting 4.5. So I think, Ian, go ahead and try to do that. If you find with the pandemic and other issues it's not viable, then we have got the extra board meeting in February. We'll just need to bring it back to the board agenda. But just do what you can on the member working group. Okay? Right. We are moving on then to the second of the 2 items that were delayed by the announcements, and this is CEO recruitment. And again, we are now a little bit behind the clock, but this is a hugely important issue. So Dawn Madden, please.
Thank you, John. I'm not putting my camera on today because I'm afraid it's impacted on sound quality.
Okay.
Before going through the paper and given the discussion at the last board, I'd like to confirm clearly a couple of points. Firstly, this report has been signed off by a monitoring officer and is aligned to the Constitution. And secondly, final approval of the appointment of either a permanent or interim CEO will come back to this board. The paper puts forward 2 options and highlights the decisions needed of each of those options. The way I'd like to go through the paper is to use the recommendations to focus the board's discussion. So moving into the paper, given the previous discussion on budget and the fact that we know that we have the IRP and devolution white paper yet to report, both of which may have implications to TFN, the first decision board is asked to make is around the basis of employment and should that be permanent or interim. And I'll stop there, John, for the discussion.
Okay, so we saw at the beginning of the paper this quite binary choice. Can I throw it open for comments on this? Louise.
Yeah, thank you very much, John, and thank you to everyone who's brought the paper here today. I actually was really supportive of the option of an interim chief executive, but I think having seen the budget and heard the discussions, I wonder if we do appoint an interim, how much commitment that is showing in terms of the future of transport for the North. And would it actually make a much stronger statement to say, right, we're here to stay. We want somebody who can come and take us forward in the next stage and really sort of go out for the best candidate that we can do for this role. Bearing in mind, if we don't attract that candidate, we may need to appoint an interim anyhow. So I think, I was keen that we had that interim on there so that we could have that discussion, and I'd welcome other board members' views on that as well.
Thank you, Louise. Peter Kennan.
Thank you, Chair. I started from the position that we need to get the very best person we can get, and I didn't want to prejudge whether that person would be permanent, fixed term, interim, because we need the best person. But I fully accept what Louise has just said, which is that it sends out entirely the wrong message to have short-term interim appointments. Andy Burnham has just said our ambition remains undimmed, and the role of Transport for the North has never been more important than it is today. And so I would hope that we can find a permanent candidate to do as good a job as Barry has done. Thank you.
And Darren Hale.
Sorry, I was struggling with the mute there. I do apologise. I will switch the camera on, although I've not got an IT problem. I've got a hair problem today, but apologies for that. But well, just quickly, following on from what Louise said, I think it really would show a lack of ambition if we were to go for a temporary appointment. And it's not like the police, is it, where someone can transfer in and retire the next day and we get loaded with all the costs. So effectively, I can't. I mean, we're dealing in the real world here. Anyone applying will know the nature of, they'll be aware of the mood music with government and the debate that's going on, and they're applying for this role in good faith. So I don't think it will necessarily affect who would apply, whether it was temporary or permanent. But I think from an ambition point of view, I do fully accept what Louise said, and I think Peter said, that I think we have to put it out there as a full-time role and say that, we're confident about transport for the North, and we're confident about the future, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Darren. Andy?
Thank you, Chair. Briefly, to support Louise and Darren and others, Peter, who said that we should be absolutely going for the best person for a permanent role. That's what this organisation needs. That's the message that this organisation needs to be sending out right now. And just to add, Chair, I'm grateful that we've been able to secure greater board input into this process. The reason we asked for it was because of some of these wider concerns about the future of TFN, and I think the proposal that's before us provides for that. And I'm grateful to you and for officers for accepting what we were calling for on that. But very comfortable with what Louise has said.
Well, it's been a good collaborative process, Andy. We have listened to what people are saying and come back with a revised proposal. I'm seeing Heather Scott and then Amanda Stone. Heather.
Yes,
and
thank you
Judith
very
Blake, well.
Yeah, thank you very much, John. Yes, I support the proposal that this should be a permanent appointment. I think going for a temporary one sends out the wrong message, and I think we've got to be positive about this. So yes, I agree with that proposal.
Thank you. Amanda Stone?
I apologise, John, that was an accidental hand.
Not to worry. You're very welcome. Judith Blake.
Thank you, John. Just to say, I think I've been on a similar journey. I thought the proposal for an interim was quite practical and pragmatic, but set in the context of where we are, I think I really support the suggestion put forward that we go for an appointment process to get the best candidate and really to help promote the importance and significance of transport for the North.
Okay, I think the board has taken a clear view on that. Back to you, Dawn.
Okay, so we go to 5.3 of the report. I think we've agreed to progress for the permanent recruitment. The next item was just to note the constitutional provisions, and I hope I've given you some comfort that has been now signed off by the monitoring officer, so hopefully that was covered. The next item is to approve the revisions to the Chief Executive role. We've updated the job description and can confirm that that's now aligned to the Constitution. We've also added in as a request of Councillor Gittins a net zero environmental task. The finance section of the JD is not completed as yet, and the reason for that, I'm just aware that there's live discussions on that. I'd like to complete that when we're just about to press the button and go live on the vacancy. So I'm looking for approval for the revised job description in Appendix 1.
Louise? I think you're muted, Louise.
Sorry, I was putting my hand up and down instead of the mute in excitement of saying that I'm happy to approve this. Yeah, I'm happy with this paper.
Great. Thank you very much, Louise. Any other views on the role profile? I think is the particular thing that we're just looking at this moment. Otherwise, I think the role profile looks like it's agreed. So let's move further down the list, Dawn.
Okay, the next we go to is the approval of the appointment panel and membership. So detailed in the report 3.9 is the outcome of John's discussions, and we're looking for approval to set up the appointment panel, and assuming that is approved, then we'd like approval of the membership as set out in the report.
Anybody wish to comment on this? This is clearly the outcome of the conversations I've had with vice chairs and various board representatives to find the highest common ground for an appointments panel. Giving an opportunity for comment. If not, I'll put the proposal to the board. So the first is that we establish an appointments panel. Do I have support for that? Thank you. And the second is that the membership be as has come out of the consensus discussions and is listed in the paper. Thank you very much for that. Back to you, Dawn.
Super. The next item is that we agree substitute members of the appointment panel may be permitted, and if so, that each panel member may nominate their substitute.
Okay, this seems good housekeeping. Is everyone agreed? Yes, thank you, Heather. Thank you, Steve. Yes, we have agreement, Mark. So that's agreed. Let's move on.
Super. Approve the terms of reference of the appointment panel. They are detailed in Appendix 2.
Terms of reference, is everybody content? Yes, I'm seeing content. Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Heather. Done.
Lovely. And we approve that if no appointment is made, that we use the appointment panel set up to agree how we work through that.
Again, that's just a contingency if we're not able to achieve our ambition. Yes, Louise, Mark, thank you. Yes, that's agreed.
Super. And the last one, members to raise any issues not covered in the report that they would like the appointment panel to consider.
So the appointments panel will, now it has been approved, be meeting at 1:30 this afternoon to get this process moving. Is there anything else you would wish the panel to consider? Okay, in that case, I think we'll get on with the job. Thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
Okay, I move to item 7 on the agenda, which is the exclusion and press and public for items 8, 9 and 10 on grounds of confidential and exempt information. We are about to discuss our final proposals on NPR, and clearly we're not yet able to do that in public. Do I have the agreement of the board to move